Canada's tacit support to anti-India activities, the Khalistani movement in particular, has time and again emerged as an irritant in India-Canada ties. In another shocking provocation, there was recently a celebration of the assassination of former Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in the Brampton city of Canada. Congress leader Imagindia tweeted a video of a float at a parade in Brampton depicting the assassination. Vohra wrote on Twitter, and I quote, "As an Indian, I am appalled by the 5-kilometer-long parade which took place in the city of Brampton in Canada, depicting the assassination of Indira Gandhi. It's not about taking sides, it's about respect for a nation's history and the pain caused by its Prime Minister's assassination. This extremism deserves universal condemnation and a united response." The parade was organized by Khalistani supporters on the 4th of June, 2 days ahead of the 39th anniversary of Operation Blue Star on the 6th of June. Other Congress leaders, including Jairam Ramesh and Shashi Tharoor, also tweeted terming the incident despicable and demanding that the Indian government strongly take up the matter with Canadian authorities. At a press conference today, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar read the Riot Act to Canada over this issue. The minister said, "Frankly, we are at a loss to understand, other than the requirements of vote bank politics, why anybody would do this. It is not one issue, no matter how egregious it may be. There is a larger underlying issue about the space which is given to separatists, extremists, and to people who advocate violence." The minister warned, it is not good for the India-Canada relationship and it's not good for Canada. Canadian High Commissioner to India, Cameron McKay, tweeted saying he was appalled by the reports of this event in his country, adding there is no place in Canada for hate or for the glorification of violence. "I categorically condemn these activities," he said. However, this is certainly not the first time that anti-India activities have been allowed and condoned in Canada. In September last year, over 100,000 Canadian Sikhs voted in a so-called Khalistani referendum in Ontario. It was organized by pro-Khalistani groups, especially Sikhs for Justice. In March this year, India's External Affairs Ministry had summoned the Canadian High Commissioner over a violent protest by Khalistani elements outside the Consulate General of India in Toronto. Over the years, Canada has increasingly become a hub of anti-India separatists. The current Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, has drawn widespread criticism for not only staying silent on the Khalistani separatist movement in that country, but also for actively engaging with them and courting them for political support. The question is, have things gone too far this time? Will Canada act against the organizers of that objectionable parade? How should India deal with this issue? As I mentioned, this isn't the first time that there has been a provocation of this nature. With Canada not just condoning, but actually actively encouraging, one would think, anti-India activities on its soil. The latest provocation being this extremely distasteful float that depicts the assassination of Indira Gandhi, our former Prime Minister, and it would seem as if this was a celebration. How are things like these being allowed by Canadian authorities? Time and again, there's been this so-called referendum by Khalistani groups in the past. There were violent protests outside India's Consulate General in Toronto earlier this year. The list goes on, and all we get is a condemnation from the Canadian High Commissioner. Surely the Justin Trudeau government needs to do more.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Always a pleasure to be with you on your channel. I learned so much from you. You put it across so well. And then I see my colleague, Mr. Sachdeva, is there. His knowledge is much greater than mine. When Maverick Justin Trudeau was re-elected Canada's Prime Minister some years ago, I did not know whether to congratulate him or to feel sorry for his country. Canada is a funny nation. Large country, small population, huge ambition, sits at the G7 high table of rich democratic nations, even though it should not be there. Now, despite its eagerness to make a mark in every international issue, ma'am, no one takes Canada seriously. When I reflect on Canada's foreign policy, I'm reminded of Joseph Stalin's question to Winston Churchill at the 1944 Moscow conference. Churchill is supposed to have said, "We went to war with Germany because it occupied Catholic Poland and we have good relations with the Vatican." And then Stalin interrupted and said, "How many divisions does the Roman Pope have?" Now, the Canadian Prime Minister a couple of years ago, the same character, Justin Trudeau, he was begging us for made in India antivirus vaccines. we responded graciously that we would see what we could do. When you talk of America, everyone thinks of the USA. Canada's own unity is very fragile. Do you remember, ma'am, what was it, the almost successful Quebec independence referendum of 1995? Then we had all these characters last year, thousands of fellows who moved on to Canada's parliament protesting the vaccine mandates and so on. And Trudeau Saab didn't know what to do, so he went into hiding. Why does he tolerate this nonsense? Three reasons: commercial interests, local political requirements, and ignorance. Khalistan insurgency has no support inside India, but still some support within the diaspora. Who benefits? Not the Khalistanis, nor their hosts who use them. Dr. Jaishankar has put it across very, very clearly, meaning that the hand that feeds terror will be the first to be bitten. And I think that we have taken the right approach. We will gradually escalate our response to this. At the moment, the High Commissioner here has said something. We are waiting for Shri Trudeau to come out with something and condemn this. Will be totally distasteful. Nobody in the world, as you rightly said, will condone violence, will condone murder, will condone assassination. In fact, judging by the recent incidents of violence against members of the Sikh community in Canada, it is becoming an assassination, where assassins run around pretty freely and get glorified and celebrated. Like, should be a wake-up call for the Canadians. If we wish to hit back, ma'am, and gradually escalate our response, it will hurt them much more than it'll hurt us. We really don't care about Canada. There's nothing that they can give us apart from some technologies which are also available elsewhere. What I do observe, however, is that as we rise, as India's global profile goes higher and higher, there are some elements outside the country who get very upset. Whether it's the G20 presidentship or the latest Morgan Stanley report on how well India has done, or the IMF report. Some people get very offended because they're brought up on stories of India being a beggar, of India starving, of India not able to get its act together. Justin Trudeau was one of those, incidentally, growing up on the lap of his late father. He heard all these stories. So now the reality of the new India stares them in the face and they're totally confused. I would say, at best, Shri Trudeau is confused. At worst, he's a two-faced Janus and a hypocrite.
Robindra Sachdeva, in light of these developments, and as I said earlier to the ambassador, it's not just about this objectionable and highly distasteful, parade projecting the assassination of former Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. There was this so-called referendum on Khalistan held in September last year in Canada. In March this year, there were violent protests held outside India's Consulate General in Toronto. The list goes on. And there are examples of how the Prime Minister, no less, of Canada has actively courted these anti-India elements. The point here is, not only, of course, does it reflect double standards on part of Canada, which, prides itself on being a liberal democracy, but, at the end of the day, the larger question is, how should India deal with this issue? Yes, we've issued démarches, we have lodged formal protests with the Canadian High Commissioner. This time, the High Commissioner has issued a condemnation, but this is far from enough. How should India deal with this?
Thank you very much. I will actually prescribe something to your question. I'll say two things which I can suggest, multiple others. One, a short term, and second, a long term. Before I get into that and the long term, what should be done, we should realize that when Minister Jaishankar says that it's vote bank politics, okay, remember, these vote banks are going to increase in Canada. The numbers of, immigrants and our Sikh brothers and sisters is increasing in Canada. So then would it mean, and it would mean, that this would grow in Canada, which needs a long-term solution. Okay, and the long-term solution is, as all long-term solutions are, something soft, undefined, but we have to have bigger outreach within the Sikh diasporas in Canada. Right, their newer generations are, as Ambassador Vohra was mentioning also or alluding to, and we can all see, the younger generations are moving away from India, not only emotionally, but even unhappily with respect to India. So that's the long term. The short term is, The police systems in any countries where we have larger number of our brothers and sisters from Punjab, especially let's say these four right now, US, Canada, Australia, England, the local policies there should be informed that whenever any Indian or let's say related organization approaches you for any police permission, because they do approach sometimes for demonstrations, even this Canada thing, they must have taken a regular permission. Okay, whenever anybody approaches you for a permission, you got to look at it through a microscope. Okay, now this Canada thing being a case in point, fine, what would happen? Let's look at things, what's happening, the nuts and bolts. Somebody must have approached for permission to say that we'll lead a parade marking the celebration or whatever, something. Fine, you get the permission. Now, who has thought earlier to see that what would be the slogans or what would the tableau convey? I mean, that's oversight, ignorance, or maybe you could say that's where the higher levels, what Minister Jaishankar and India says and Prime Minister Modi says, the more we talk to these ministers and the prime ministers in these countries, the more it should percolate down from their top levels down to their local provinces and the local police and intelligence systems. That's something I would say is practical today in a tactical basis, right? But in the long-term basis, we need to win back or figure out ways other than just condemning what's happening and other than just condemning what's happening and in a way, spreading. See, another thing which is happening through all of this, wider and wider is the spread of the idea of Khalistan within the Sikh diaspora spreading. So we got to prevent that and, win over hearts and minds, whichever way. A lot will be public diplomacy and all. Now, I'll give you one example of something practical. The first step I was saying. Now,
but I'm not
PM
sure,
Modi
Mr.
is going to
Sachdeva,
Washington.
if you can win over the hearts and minds of extremists and whether that should even be a priority for any government, frankly.
No. I'm not saying extremists, Neha.
But the focus here is clearly on these extremist elements, the separatists who are carrying on with anti-India activities, particularly on Canadian soil. We are talking about how India needs to deal with it at a diplomatic level, at a bilateral level with Canada, and how it needs to be impressed upon the government of Canada that they need to crack down on these elements. I'm sorry, sir, but I beg to differ with you. This debate is not about winning the hearts and minds of
Neha,
separatist elements.
Give me 15 seconds.
But sir, I'm just saying you are deviating. This is what we are discussing.
Fair enough. You may, but give me 15 seconds to complete what I'm saying. There's a pipeline out there. The extremists are, let's say, 2 out of 100. The sympathizers are 20 out of 100. Out of these 20, sympathizers arise and come the extremists of tomorrow. We have to reduce this pool. I'm not saying that any extremist can be won over by hearts and minds. I'm saying it's a long-term process. This pool, which has sympathy, should be reduced or should reduce. Only then the actual number who are picking up arms and devising such evil schemes will reduce. I rest my case. Thank you.